Morning, everybody. Thank you all for joining us today for the very first of our diversity and inclusion educational series, Race, Housing, and the Importance of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. We plan on starting on time as we have much to cover. Before we introduce our speaker, I wanted to recognize two of our line officers, President-elect Gary Nelson and First Vice President Eric Gibbs.
Hello, everybody.
There we go. Our speaker today, Dr. Leonard Moore, is currently the George Littlefield Professor of American History and the former Vice President of Diversity and Community Engagement at the University of Texas at Austin. He's a native of Cleveland, Ohio, who earned his Bachelor of Arts from Jackson State University in 1993 and his PhD from Ohio State University in 1998. Inside the classroom, Dr. Moore teaches more than 1,000 undergrad students in the fall semester in his two classes, History of the Black Power Movement and Race in the Age of Trump. Dr. Moore also directs summer programs in Beijing, China, Cape Town, South Africa, and in Dubai. As a scholar, Professor Moore is the author of 3 books on Black politics, and his 4th book, Teaching Black History to White People, will be published this spring. Dr. Moore, please unmute yourself and let's begin.
All right, thank you, Steve, and thank you, Gary, the leadership. Thank you all so much. I just want to commend you for being proactive. And for those of you on the call or on the webinar, whatever we call it, we're going to have fun for the next 60 minutes. All right. Sometimes people approach these kind of sessions with some trepidation and fear. So at the end of the session, you will not be forced to change how you vote or your political identification or your ideology or your religion. But I think these conversations are healthy. And this is one of the things I appreciate about America. Now, we have our issues, but I think America has always been one of the places where we can have an open exchange of ideas. And what has been disappointing, I would say, over the last 3 or 4 years is that you have close friends and family members who will stop talking to each other because they disagree politically. And I don't think that is healthy. I have friends, and I have one friend, I'm a white guy. I told him, man, the only thing me and you agree upon is Jesus. We don't agree upon nothing else. All right. But we still have a friendship. You know what I mean? And we can talk about issues because he's coming from his perspective and I'm coming from my perspective. So I think these things are healthy. So before we get started, I'm gonna have them put you all in the groups for 5 minutes. We're gonna have a hard stop at 5 minutes. And in your group, you're gonna ask one question, and I need everybody just to answer it. And we don't need anybody to dominate the conversation. Just one question. It's simply this: describe the neighborhood you grew up in. All right. All right, I guess everybody's back. So the reason I had us do that exercise is for 2 reasons. Number one, hopefully you learned something about the person you were in a group with. But number 2, I think often, when it comes to, the way we view the world and the way we look at issues of race and ethnicity, where we were raised plays a big role in that. So I'm from Cleveland, Ohio. I grew up in a community that was roughly 40% Black, 30% white, and 30% Orthodox Jewish. So a lot of my boys growing up went to the Hebrew school. We played basketball, shirts versus skins. They would have the yarmulke on. So I grew up in a very ethnically diverse community. All right. We knew about all the Jewish holidays, Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, Hanukkah, all of that, because it was woven into the fabric of our community. So when it's come to issues of race for me, I've never really had a problem talking about it, engaging with different viewpoints, because that is in many ways how we were raised. And so I think it's important because how we were raised, it plays a big part in how we see the world. It plays a tremendous part in how we see the world. Again, how we look at contemporary race issues. So I want to do something real quick. I'm going to professor mode for about 7 minutes. I want to show y'all some slides, and then we're gonna play the game of Monopoly. I hope y'all know how to play Monopoly. If you don't, you can get a couple minutes to get on Google, but I want to explain in many ways how the game of Monopoly explains race in America. I'm a phenomenal Monopoly player. If you could gamble on Monopoly, I would do it. I play to win. I like beating my kids all the time, but my son has been winning lately. He's 15. So we got to change that up. So I'm going to put some slides up. And again, I just want us to have an open mind while I take us through this stuff. And again, I'm going to go into my history professor mode real quick. All right. So what I want to do here, I want to take us through many ways. I want to talk about race and housing after World War II. All right. Many of us know that prior to World War II, home ownership was out of reach for roughly 95% of all Americans, regardless of your background. You had to have a sizable down payment, 25%. And it's not till after World War II where we get these very innovative loan programs. One, the FHA loan program, Federal Housing Authority or Administration, and two, VA loans, right? These are home loans for veterans. So what these loan programs do, it makes home ownership accessible to working class people. And I think this is important because home ownership has not always been a fabric of American life and culture. So here's a typical ad you would see in the 1940s, shows a white couple letting them know that home ownership is within reach and they have houses. And it looks like some of the houses when I used to watch Leave It to Beaver growing up. Any of y'all watch Leave It to Beaver? There were never any black people on that show, but that was one of my favorite shows. All right. So let's move on. So this here, Levittown, Pennsylvania, suburb of Philly, right? This is one of the the first master plan suburban community in the United States. So when you think of the modern suburb, I know y'all got a lot of them in Phoenix and Tucson, Scottsdale, places like that. Understand the modern suburb was built on this Levittown model. You see the homes here. They had elementary schools within the neighborhood. They had parks, they had swimming pools, they had green belts. And this was a master plan community, 1957 Philadelphia. So this is what the modern suburb looked like. Now, of course, if you're going to have suburbs, people need a way to get downtown to work. So with suburbs came, guess what? The construction of highways, all right? Eisenhower will sign the Interstate Highway Act. And here you see a highway from the 1950s because you got to find a way to get suburbanites home and back to the city for work. So here is a modern highway. And to illustrate just how big a role race played even in highway construction before we get to housing, look at the following picture. This is Indianapolis. So guess what happened? Typically, when they were building modern interstates, Chicago, Detroit, St. Louis, Cleveland, Indianapolis, places like that, guess what they did? They built them directly through African-American neighborhoods. And what you see there on the screen is an entire Black community in Indianapolis that was completely bulldozed to make room for these highways. All right. So when we talk about housing discrimination in a minute, understand that suburban development, right, and also making home ownership accessible to working class people for the first time in American history, it comes at the expense of African-American homeowners because in many ways their communities are completely demolished to make room for these interstates. Let's keep it moving. Now, here's a typical ad you would see in the 1940s and 50s targeting veterans. Basically, they're saying a guaranteed loan. And the way these loan programs work, if you were a veteran and you were white, all you literally had to do was walk in a bank, come in there with your military papers, and you would basically be given a mortgage with $1 down. And again, the federal government would back the mortgage, but basically they have to find ways to get people into homes. So you get these very attractive loan programs, the FHA and VA, to put people in homes. And this is a typical ad you would see. However, home ownership for Black folks was out of reach. And we're going to spend some time, I'm going to show you some slides in the ways they were out of reach. Number one, this right here. When I ask most people where this sign is at, they say Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama. No, this sign came from California. And white homeowners in the 1940s and 50s in some parts of the country were very clear about who they wanted in their neighborhood. And this was a sign on the side of a freeway in California. We want white tenants in our community. All right, let's move on. Now, here you've seen this. You've heard about bank redlining. And I love when I talk to my students, they say, Dr. Moore, I don't believe housing discrimination ever existed. People are making this stuff up. What you are looking at right here is a map created by the Homeowners Loan Corporation, a federally funded agency. And every city had a map. And you can go online now and find about 230 cities. And this is what we call a redlining map. And look at the key to the left. Bankers were told, when people come in and apply for a mortgage, when they want to use one of those attractive loan programs where they can get a house for $1 down or very little down, look at this map. And if they if they live in a community, look at their address and go to the corresponding map, and that will tell you whether or not to give them a loan. And here's what we call as the redlining map. You see the bright red box in the left where it says hazardous. So you would never see anything written that says, don't give home loans to Black people. But you had things like this, where this is a part of Chicago where the entire Black community is sort of painted red. So loan officers knew, we don't have to look at a credit report. We don't have to look at pay stubs. We don't have to look at income. We're going to immediately deny the loan, because the fear was if Black people got loans and they moved to white areas, they would drive down the value of the property. So this is a bank. This is what we call a redlining map. And again, there are about 230 of these maps available online. Now, one thing about people who discriminated, they kept very good records because in their mind, they weren't doing anything wrong. All right, let's move on. Now, this is what we call a restrictive covenant. And this was also used to keep African Americans out of certain communities. A restrictive covenant was a deed attached to the property, and it was legally binding. Here's what it says. None of the said lands, interests, or improvements shall be resold, sold, conveyed, leased, rented, here we go now, or any way used, occupied, or acquired by, here we go, any person of Negro blood. Then it goes further. Or any person of the Semitic race, talking about Jewish people. And then at the last line, they get even more specific. Armenians, Jews, Hebrews, Persians, Assyrians. In some communities, depending on where you were, the only other ethnic group you would see on here, you would see two. You may see people of Asian descent, and you also in some places would see Italian written on there as well. And again, these were legally binding deeds where the property could not be sold or rented to an African American. Now, the one thing about the deeds, the one ethnic group that was on all of them was going to be Black folk. All right. So this has also kept Black folk out of white areas, not only white areas, but areas, better areas of the city. All right, let's move on. Now, look at this right here. This is how open people were about wanting to keep their neighborhoods white. This is like a, what do you call it? A HOA. Okay, this is like an HOA from Washington, D.C. And look at what they say. Attention, white home buyers. The largest restricted white community in Washington invites your attention to the decision of the Supreme Court. Here we go. That Negroes cannot buy in a restricted white section. So they are promoting this to potential white homeowners that if you move into our neighborhood, you will not have to worry about Negroes buying in our neighborhood. All right. So again, they aren't shy about this at all. This is public. This is something they handed out. This particular ad was in the newspaper. All right. All right. Let's keep moving on. Let's keep going. All right. Now look at this. Violence and intimidation also played a role. Now read this. It says, help the white people keep this district white. Men are needed to keep our lines solid. And here we say Sunday and Monday, we need help. Here we go. Don't be yellow. Come out. We need every white man. And look at the last sentence on this flyer. It says, we want our girls to walk on the street, not raped. Folks, you can't make this stuff up. They handed this stuff out because in their mind, they were trying to preserve what they had. And what you see on something like this is this fear that if African Americans moved into white communities, not only would the property values go down, but let's take it a step further, that Black men and Black boys would rape and sexually assault white women and white girls. All right. This is what I love about being a historian, because you don't have to make stuff up. All the documents are here. All right, let's move on. Levittown, Pennsylvania, that first suburb I showed you, Levittown from 1957, the first master plan suburban development in the country that all other suburbs were modeled after. They had a race ride in 1957, shortly after it opened. When one African-American family moved in, they were met by a mob of 400 residents of Levittown who used violence and intimidation to try to keep them out. This is not in Mississippi. This is not in Alabama. This is not in Texas. This is in suburban Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And this just goes to show you in many ways how intense things were over Black folks moving in. Let me move on. All right. So when Black people are unable to move to better areas of the city or move to suburbs, here is where they are stuck at. This is St. Louis, late 1940s, early 1950s. This is the back of a 3-story tenement, right? So Black people were forced to stay into crowded and congested and unsanitary areas, okay? So imagine many of you, if you grew up in a nice neighborhood, how much different would your life have been if you'd have grown up in a very low income community, all right? Because we can predict the life that somebody will have simply by looking at the zip code when they are born. And we say, okay, this person born in that zip code, their life trajectory will look like this. If they're born in another zip code, their life trajectory may be different. We can predict it before those babies go home from the maternity ward. All right, let's move on. Because the housing crisis was so bad in the Black community because people couldn't move out, this is Chicago, you had Black people in the 1950s living any and everywhere. And this is a family of 6 with some relatives living in a garage in Chicago because it was just so overcrowded because the community, because people were not allowed to expand and move to other areas of the city. All right, so let's do something real quick. Here, before we get to the Monopoly game, this is the largest public housing project in the country at the time. It's in St. Louis, Pruitt-Eagle Housing Project. Any housing developer or sociologist or person who's expert in child development will tell you that having this many people living on top of each other, this close together, look, there are no trees. Look, it's not healthy. It's not conducive to a good family or community life. But this is what city planners and city officials came up with. Let's build public housing projects to solve this shortage. No, the way you solve the shortage is by allowing Black people to move to other areas of the city. But since there was so much housing discrimination, they built these high-rise public housing projects. I think what you have here is about maybe 22 or 23 buildings, 14 to 15 stories high. And that is the condition some people were forced to live in. All right, let's move on. So here we go. So I'm a creative person. I think I'm creative. So about 4 or 5 months ago, I told my wife, I said, you know what? I said, Monopoly is an interesting game. And I said, if you think about it, we can use the game of Monopoly to explain race in America. So before I go any further, I want you to turn your mic on and do me a favor. If we have any good Monopoly players on here, give me one of your strategies. Don't give me something basic like buy all the property. We know that. But give me a strategy that I can use when I play Monopoly again. Anybody?
Buy around Park Place. Not Park Place, free parking right on that corner.
You do what? You buy around free parking. Okay. Right. All right. Anybody else?
Buy the railroads.
Buy the railroad. Hey, that's my favorite strategy.
I was going to say the same thing. Buy the railroads.
I will go bankrupt buying the railroads. You know why? Because it's if you get all 4, you'll be collecting $200 almost every time somebody rolls. All right. So, but don't tell nobody that secret. I will spend my last to get all the railroads. Now, here's the thing about the railroads. If you own all 4 of them, you'll never go bankrupt. Now, you may not win the game. The game will be a stalemate, but you will never go bankrupt. Give me one more strategy. Anybody?
I buy all the cheaper properties first.
So you're going to buy the cheaper
Mediterranean, and I build from there, put hotels on them. And then I start buying more property, and I go from the least expensive to the most.
Okay, so you're going to buy the purples and the light blues to start off with. Okay,
exactly.
We'll take one more.
Houses can make you more money than the hotels sometimes.
Ooh, that sounds like a real estate investor. She says houses can make you more money than hotels. All right, one more, last one for real this time. Anybody?
Got to buy the utilities.
Okay, you're going to buy the utilities. Okay, you get both of them. Okay, this small money, but over time. All right, so many of us have played Monopoly. And, you know what's funny? When I said, give me a strategy, y'all had it. Somebody said, I'm going to buy the lower income properties. I'm going to build on them, expand from there. Somebody said, I'm about railroads. The first person said, I'm about properties around free parking. Those are the light browns and the reds. So here, two things. Number one, the property that is land, the set of properties that'll bring you the most amount of money are going to be the browns.
Place.
Tennessee and New York. Those properties get landed on more than any other property on the board. How do I know? Me and my son did it as a science experiment. All right. But the number one property that gets landed on the most, the one single property that gets landed on the most is going to be Illinois. And that's one of the reds.
All right. But corner.
What do you say?
That's why I said that corner.
That's right. The corner is
exactly, right. You're right. Exactly right.
So thank you. So don't tell nobody that. So here we go. So let's say we all sit down to play Monopoly, right? And it's me and it's 5 of my white friends. All right. We pass out the money. Everybody gets $1,500. You pick a piece. You got the dog, you got the shoe, you got the iron, you got the thimble, you got the car, you got the man on the horse. And we're ready to play. But they tell me, they say, well, Leonard, because you are Black, the rules of the game are going to be a little bit different. It's like, man, what are you talking about? I'm ready to play the game. I got my strategy. I was talking to these folks in Arizona and they gave me these tips. Here are the rules for you, Leonard. Bam. Leonard, the biggest rule for you is that you cannot buy any property until you roll for the 20th time. All right. I done been to school. I done been talked to some real estate people. I got my strategy. I got my game plan. But then they tell me, okay, Leonard, you can play. You can go around the board. You can pay taxes. You can go to jail. You can pay rent when you land on people. But you cannot buy any property until you roll for the 20th time. Okay, since I was taught to work hard, I know that's a hurdle, but guess what? I'm waiting. So I roll for the 17th time, the 18th time, the 19th time. And now I'm here, the 20th time. I got my strategy. Now I can buy property. What has happened to the game when it is now time for me to buy the property?
A lot of it is gone.
It's all gone. And now, one of my white friends from next door walks into the house. She observes the game. She sees that all the white players have money and property, and I don't have anything. I don't have any property. I don't have any money. And she just makes the assumption, Leonard, what's wrong? You don't have any property. You don't have any money. Oh, Leonard, you're lazy. You want to be on welfare. You want other people to take care of you. And it's like, no, Jackie, the rules of the game were different for me. She said, Leonard, that happened. No, the rules of the game weren't different for you. That stuff didn't go on. Okay, put that right there. Let's take it a step further. Let's say we've been playing the game for about 2.5 hours and we're tired. And we say, you know what? I'm going to go home. But how about, our children want to play. So let's let our children take our place. So my neighbors get up, their kids come over, and guess what happens? They get transferred the property and the money. My daughter, Lauren, gets up. She comes to the game. I don't have hardly any money. I have no property. And so now somebody will observe our kids playing and they'll be like, well, Lauren, you don't have any money or property. And she'll be like, of course I don't. Because y'all discriminated against my dad. And the only reason y'all got money and property is because you inherited a lot of it. And then that person would say, Lauren, I had nothing to do with that. That happened a long time ago. And so I always give this illustration. Because when you talk, you all are in real estate. Because when you talk about wealth being, the majority of people, their biggest asset is the property they own. I am from Cleveland Heights, Ohio. And when my dad bought a house in a suburb called Cleveland Heights in 1965, he was told he could only buy on one particular street in that entire suburb. He wanted to buy a house in Shaker Heights, wasn't allowed to, had to buy a house in Cleveland Heights, 1965. And it was 3 other Black families on that street, all right? Couldn't buy anywhere else in the suburb. Now, the house my dad wanted to buy in Cleveland is worth about $800,000 now. The one he had to buy is only worth about $120,000. Let's take it a step further. You all are in Arizona. Some of you all have been to Pasadena, California. You've seen the Rose Bowl, if nothing else, on TV. My wife grew up within walking distance of the Rose Bowl. Her parents still own a home there. When her dad moved to Pasadena in 1955, he was told he could only buy a house on one particular street. He wanted to move close to the Rose Bowl. The neighborhood he wanted to buy in, those homes now go from 3.2 million to about 4.5. He had to buy a 2-bedroom bungalow. He added on, it's now worth $700,000. But my point I'm making is that housing discrimination, it does have an impact on a family's wealth. It has a tremendous impact. When me and my wife bought our first house, we were living in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, this completely blew me away. And this just goes to show how, in America, we are still, we live in racially segregated worlds. We're buying our house, and I remember the loan officer saying, okay, this your interest rate, you will need, this needs to be your down payment. And she said, you can get the down payment from anywhere. You can get it from your parents or your relatives. I'm like, my parents spent all their money putting me through college. And I didn't know there was such a thing where people would give their children like $100,000 or $200,000 to get a piece of property. But it explains it now. Chris Rock said something a long time ago. He said, me, Mary J. Blige, and Jay-Z and Beyonce lived in the same neighborhood in New Jersey. He said their neighbor was a white dentist. And I'm laughing now because in our neighborhood in Texas, the homes go from between $600,000 to $900,000. And most of the Black folk out here, engineers, attorneys, physicians, things of that nature. But my white neighbor, he repairs air conditioners for a living. He doesn't own the company. He just repairs them. And so when you talk about the generational effect of housing discrimination, folks, you are talking about, this is an economic issue. It's not, be proud that your dad was able to buy in Cleveland Heights. Yeah, but if he could have bought in Shaker Heights, then it changes the economic trajectory of our family. All right? Any questions on before we move on? Y'all doing okay? Y'all still with me? I can't see none of y'all, but y'all still with me? Okay, thank you. Let's move on. And if this is making you uncomfortable, you're in the right place then. All right, we just getting started. So here we go. So I'm a northern boy. That's what I am. But I've been in the South much of my professional life. I taught at Louisiana State University for 7 years, and I've been at the University of Texas for 14. And I always find myself often speaking to white conservative audiences, and I love it. We can make a documentary about it, and I love it. I just believe in the open debate and the open intellectual exchange, and my feelings don't get hurt. But here's the thing I noticed about the South. In Texas especially, people will say anything to you, and they don't care. I'm going to tell 2 quick stories. Number one, my daughter was in competitive cheer, and I'm warning you right now, if you have a daughter, that stuff is expensive as hell. So don't even, if you're not willing to pay that money, don't even let her know it's an option. All right. And they do the same routine for the entire season. It's a 1:45-second routine. And you go to these tournaments and the pyramid always falls. And the pyramid is going to fall. All right. But then your daughter's going to want you to sit there for another 5 to 6 hours, so everybody can get a participant trophy at the end. All right. So here we go. So I'm at one of these events, and, I love when I'm talking to other, I'm talking to other white parents. I love it because inevitably the question comes, well, Leonard, what do you do for a living? And this is like a Saturday Night Live skit. And I say, well, I'm a professor at UT. And they say, Austin? I said to myself, I live in Austin. I'm not at UT Detroit or UT Chicago. Yes, I'm at the University of Texas at Austin. All right. And they say Austin with a question mark. All right. So anyway, so we're sitting there and he said, well, Leonard, what do you teach? I said, man, I'm a history professor. And then he says, what classes do you teach? And Shyla, I'm looking at you because you're about to crack up with this. I say, man, I actually teach a class called the Black Power Movement and a class called Race in the Age of Trump. And when I say that, it is like 10 seconds of awkward silence. All right. Because they don't know how to follow up. They don't know how do I follow that up? And it's just awkward. And sometimes I say, that's a little awkward, is it? And they say, yes. So anyway, so after our daughters had performed, he comes back and he says, Leonard, I said, yeah. He said, can I ask you a question? I said, sure. And he says, well, I don't want to be offensive. Now, what I have learned in my 49 years of life, if somebody says, I don't want to be offensive, they probably about to be offensive, but I can take it. And I got a thick skin. And he says, well, Leonard, man, you know, my daughter really wants to go to UT, but it's so competitive to get in. And if you aren't in the top 5% of your class, she, you know, I know it's tough to get in. I said, you're right, it's going to be tough. He said, but, you know, Leonard, my daughter's in all these AP classes. You know, she's at this phenomenal high school. She's at a very elite public high school. And he said, you know, Leonard, I think it's unfair. I think y'all letting in too many unqualified Black and Mexican students. That's what he said. Then he says this. And again, I'm not offended. I like the debate. He said, well, Leonard, you know, this automatic admit rule y'all got. So in Texas, if you're in the top 6% of your class, you can go to any state. You're automatically admitted into any state school. But UT Austin is the one everybody wants to come to. He says, well, Leonard, you know, I think y'all discriminating against my daughter. I said, I said, just because she can't go to UT, I'm sure she has other places she can go. He said, yeah, but UT is her top choice. He said, if my daughter was at an inner city school or one of those poor schools in the valley along the Texas-Mexico border, she'd be valedictorian. I said, you know what, man, that is an interesting perspective you have. But have you considered that if she was at an inner city school or if she was at a school on the border, her whole life would be different? And he said, man, I never thought about that. I said, I know you haven't. You have had her in one of the best high schools in America. So because she can't get into Texas, she probably can go to Michigan. She can go to USC. She may be able to go to UVA. She has options. Second story. I was invited by a group. There's an elite suburb in Austin called Lakeway. All right. Very exclusive suburb. Like Drew Brees is from there. Baker Mayfield. They produce all these quarterbacks. All right. So anyway, I got an email one day and the name of the organization was called, listen to this now, the Lakeway Men's Club. The Lakeway Men's Club was inviting me to come speak to them on a Thursday morning. They meet 50 weeks out of the year. Now check this out. When I said Lakeway Men's Club and I told you it was a wealthy, exclusive suburb, a certain image went in your mind. That's it. What you thought about when I said Lakeway Men's Club, that's the group. That is them. You have nailed it. So I told two of my Black male grad students, I said, hey, man, I need y'all to come with me to this meeting Tuesday morning for two reasons. Number one, I know it's going to be hilarious, but number two, I may need some protection getting out of there. All right. So we show up and it's about 95 white men, you know, leaders, you know, people with money, influential people. OK, there are 3 Black people in the building, me and the 2 brothers I brought with me. So anyway, before I said anything, the director is up passing out my bio and 9 people get up and walk out. I said, damn, I ain't even said nothing yet. All right. They walk out. So I told my boy, I said, man, check this out. I'm not going to say anything about race. So I gave a 20-minute lecture on the importance of American kids studying abroad, the importance of American kids understanding globalization and spending time as an undergraduate in another part of the world so they can get a different perspective. So I finished my lecture and 10 seconds after I finished my lecture, hand goes up. I say, yes. He says, Dr. Moore, what do you think about Black Lives Matter? I said, well, I didn't talk about Black Lives Matter. I said, but sir, I can tell you've been waiting to ask this question for a long time. So brother, you have the floor. Here's what he said. He said, well, Dr. Moore, it's more of a statement. If you all would just obey the police, you wouldn't get shot. All right. But I appreciate it. Because here's what I said. I said, sir, I completely understand from where you sit how you have that viewpoint. It makes complete sense to me because many white Americans, not all, but many have this white framework of civil rights. I was talking to a pastor in Dallas, older white guy, and he said, Dr. Moore, man, I just don't see all the racism people talk about. And I said, you wouldn't see it. But just because you don't see it, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Okay. So anyway, I think there's this framework of civil rights many of my white neighbors have. They believe that just because all the barriers to segregation and, you know, and Black folk not being able to vote, they believe that because of civil rights legislation in the 60s, there are no more problems. The 1964 Civil Rights Act banned segregation. The 1965 Voting Rights Act gave African Americans the right to vote. All right. But I remind them this. Follow me. If people in the South were locked out of the economy from roughly 1880 to 1965. You mean to tell me that they can catch up? You'll never catch up when you were completely locked out of the economy, all right? So that's interesting. Now, often when I talk to a lot of people, and then after this, I'll give you a couple nuggets and we'll move on. And like I said, I have these open and honest conversations. They're like, Dr. Moore, I don't understand this term, institutional racism or systemic racism. It seems like y'all just making stuff up. And I love these questions. So what I'm going to do, the next 3 minutes, I'm going to give you an example of institutional racism. You don't have to agree with it, but let me give it to you. And we're going to look at the death of George Floyd. And I want y'all to just jot this down for me. And I'm going to take you through step 1 through step 7. And this, what I believe, is a good example of what we call institutional or systemic racism. All right, here we go. So step 1, here we go. And let me say this. Let me go on. Step 1, the police officer kept his knee on Mr. Floyd's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds in broad daylight at a major intersection in a major city with bystanders recording the entire incident on their cell phone. That's step 1. Write that down. All right, that's step 1. Here we go. Step 2. When Mr. Floyd slips into unconsciousness at about minute 4, when he slips into unconsciousness at minute 4, the officer keeps his knee on his neck. All right, that's step number 2. Step number 3. Here we go now. It's about to get good. Even after the paramedics arrive at like minute 7, Mr. Floyd, the police officer keeps his knee on Mr. Floyd's neck for an additional 60 seconds, although the paramedics are there. All right. Step number 4. Here we go. All 4 of the police officers conspired to lie on the police report. All right. So I gave you step 1 through 4. I want y'all to circle that and draw an arrow and write down the culture of the Minneapolis Police Department. All right. That's going to be steps 1 through 4. All right. Now we're going to go to steps 5 and 6. All right. Step 5. The night of the incident, the district attorney said, and I am quoting, "There is other evidence that does not support an indictment." All right. That's the district attorney said that, as if what we were seeing on camera, as if there was more to the story. So it doesn't support an indictment. That's step 5. Step 6, here we go. When the district attorney indicts the officers 3 days later, 2 or 3 days later, they are indicted on lesser charges like 3rd-degree manslaughter and 2nd-degree something, but they were indicted on lesser charges. All right. So that's steps 5 and 6. Here we go. I want y'all to circle that, draw an arrow, and put the culture of the district attorney's office. All right. We're about to connect all these dots. All right. Step number 7, and you cannot make this stuff up. The medical examiner, y'all may call him or her a coroner in Arizona, whatever you use. When the medical examiner issued their report on the cause of death for George Floyd, all right, it said Mr. Floyd died from cardiac arrest caused by heart disease. They had to get an independent medical examiner report to say that he died from asphyxiation, meaning strangulation. Circulation was cut off to the brain. All right. Now, circle step 7, and I want y'all to write an arrow and just put medical examiner. All right. So when we talk about institutional racism, anybody watch Law and Order on here? And how when it comes on, they said there are 2 separate branches, right? The police officers who investigate the crimes and the district attorney's office who do what? Prosecute. What we saw in the death of George Floyd were 3 separate institutions, 3 separate institutions. The police department, the district attorney's office, and the medical examiner all coming together to protect one white police officer. And let me say this, because there's this idea that Black folk don't like law enforcement. No, we want law enforcement. We want good law enforcement. If you Google Derek Owens, Cleveland Police Department, what will happen? My childhood friend, a police officer, got killed by a drug dealer in Cleveland 13, 14 years ago. Me and Derek went to kindergarten all the way up together, and he got killed. So this is not about disrespecting law enforcement. What frustrates Black people, and hence why you get the term Black Lives Matter, I want y'all to get this, is because whenever we have these incidents, we are never calling for a rush to judgment. We never believe that a police officer should just automatically be convicted and thrown in jail. What Black people are just asking for is an indictment. Can you get a trial? We believe the police officer should have his or her day in court in front of a jury of their peers, where they can talk about what they saw, what they were going through, how they were trained. But when you can't even get an indictment, that leads to the frustration, hence the term Black Lives Matter. Let me go, thing I was about to say. I said, let me go a step further. What frustrates me about the good cops, and I know a lot of them, is that they cover up for the bad ones. And that's what frustrates me. 99% of cops are awesome people. Awesome people. But do you ever wonder why they cover up for the bad ones? And it's the 1 out of 100. I sound like Jesus now, huh? Talking about going after the one lamb or something like that. It's the 1 after 100. It's the 1 out of the 100 that makes it bad for everybody else. That taints an entire profession. Okay? So that is what some of the frustration is. Now, let me speak to George Floyd piece. Everybody on this call, everybody has a family member, either nuclear family or extended family member, who has dealt with some kind of addiction. Every person on here. Every person has dealt with that. Do you mean to tell me that your loved one should lose their life over passing a $20 counterfeit bill? And we try to rationalize it by saying, oh, he had drugs in his system? Everybody on here has a family member who has an addiction issue or has had an addiction issue. That does not mean their life has no value. And what frustrates me is that we want to go look in the victim's background and say, oh, he had drugs in his system. Well, a lot of our family members do drugs. Some are addicted to pain pills, prescription medication. Others are caught up into recreational drug use. That does not mean your life should be taken from you. All right, let me do this before we get out of here and take some questions. I'm going to give y'all, four tips to how we make America a better place. All right. Number one, you got to see color. You got to see color. Got to see it. You know, we're not going to twist King's. Well, Dr. Leonard, I don't see color because Dr. King said we wanted to move beyond that. Quit twisting King's words around. All right. Here's what I mean. And help me from all. I understand that in a corporate environment, the experiences of women are different than the experiences of men. Completely. When I teach my MBA class, the stories that these women talk about, the sexual harassment on a daily basis that these women talk about, right? It always gives the men in my class a totally different perspective. And so here's my point. When I teach my Trump class every fall semester, it's 500 students in the class, and I'll typically have 40 undocumented students. We don't call people illegal. Illegal is not a noun, all right? People's lives have value. 40 will be undocumented. I have about 7 or 8, typically women who are Muslim who wear a hijab. Now, here's what I tell people. I don't treat all my students the same, but I treat them fairly. So shouldn't I see these 40 undocumented students as having a different experience? Whenever they get a text message, they're thinking, has one of my family members been deported to a country they've never been to before? Or whenever somebody walks in class late, they're thinking, is that ICE coming to pick me up and sending me away? And shouldn't I talk to those Muslim women with the hijab who have to deal with, harassment and stares and all that kind of stuff just because they are Muslim? Absolutely. So folks, you got to see color. That doesn't mean you stereotype people, but it's just an acknowledgement that your experience has probably been a little different. And I love when I talk to white women, because often when we talk about race, they get defensive. But when you start talking to corporate women and what they deal with, regardless of race, oh, their experience is completely different than that of men. So number one, you got to see color. Number two, you got to admit your biases and stereotypes. All right. All Chinese people are not good at math. Can I say that? Quit assuming they are. I spent a lot of time in Beijing. It's 1.4 billion people over there, and the overwhelming majority of them are not good at math. All right. So here's what I mean by stereotypes. If you see a black man walk in your office, 7 feet tall, don't say anything about basketball. Don't say nothing about basketball. All right? So here's my point. One of the groups I used to stereotype all the time as a professor early in my career, I would always stereotype white female students with blonde hair. And let me tell you the assumptions I made about them. I'm looking at Carrie. Carrie, was your hair pseudo blonde, or you got like salt and pepper? Okay, so so Carrie, did you go to college? You go to college, Carrie?
I didn't. No.
Okay, so I'm using Carrie as a prototype. All right, Carrie, can I use an example? So let's say Carrie walks in my office, and with the minute I would see her waiting outside my office, I'm like, here we go again, another spoiled white girl who comes from wealth, whose parents are wealthy. She drives a BMW. She really doesn't need to be in college. Her parents have a whole bunch of money, and she's in some super elite sorority that costs about $1,000 a month dues. All right. So woman walks in my office, and I summed her up in 2 seconds. As we start talking, she says, Dr. Moore, my 11th and 12th grade year, me and my mom lived in a battered women's shelter. She said when she came to college, that was the first time she had a semi-private room in more than 2.5 years. And I told her, I stereotyped you. I thought you were rich. I thought you were one of them sororities. She said, Dr. Moore, I don't like those sorority girls, and I couldn't afford it even if I did like them. So my point is, you got to be open with what biases and stereotypes you have, because we all got them. I was at a faculty senate meeting. I've been a professor 24 years, all right? I was at a faculty senate meeting 2 years ago. The men's basketball coach from Texas was there. He was introducing himself. And after the end of the faculty senate meeting, one of my white colleagues, didn't know his name, I overhear him, and he points to me, and he says, here's what I hear, quote, ask him, pointing at me, he's an assistant basketball coach. And I said, damn, I'm an assistant basketball coach now? But these stereotypes, one of my good friends introduced me, I was giving a lecture on campus, and she said, and Dr. Moore played basketball in college. I said, damn, I did? But here's the stereotype. Many of my white friends who went to college, the only Black people they knew were athletes. And there's this stereotype that if we go to Arizona or Arizona State or UCLA or USC, we must be on an athletic scholarship. All right. So check your biases and stereotypes, and we all have. Number 3, here we go. Get uncomfortable. Some of this stuff should make you uncomfortable. It should. You know why? Because we are learning. Here's the question. Kids can talk about race with no problem. How come it's the adults who have a problem? I had a white student fall in 2019. She said, Dr. Moore, I'm glad I got in your class. My mom didn't want me to take it. I said, why? She said, well, she heard you were a crazy radical professor, and she didn't want me to turn you into a liberal. I'm like, what? And I said, so what made your mom allow you to take the class? Here's what she said, my mom said, you can take the class, but here are the conditions. You have to send me the syllabus. I'm going to buy all the books on the syllabus. And after every lecture on Tuesday and Thursday, you're going to take a copy, you're going to take a picture of the notes, and you're going to send them to me, and we're going to discuss it every Tuesday and Thursday evening. All right? Guess what happened at the end of the semester? The mom sends me a long email. Dr. Moore, I had some concerns about my daughter taking your class. I thought you were going to turn her into a liberal. I thought, you were going to teach her not to be a Christian. I said, I'm a Christian. I'm borderline Black evangelical. All right. But she said, Dr. Moore, reading the books for the class with my daughter in the class notes, she said, you have changed my entire family. She said, we have never been exposed to African-American history before. And she said, I want to thank you because my family is better for it. And lastly, number 4, if you're going to be an ally, this is important. If you're going to be an ally, we don't need white people to go start a Black Lives Matter chapter. No, we don't need you to go to Africa and do a mission trip. Ask people who you're trying to help, what can you fight for? When I talk to a lot of our LGBTQ students on campus, I ask them, what can I help you fight for? That's what I ask them. I don't assume that I know. All right. I don't speak for them. I say, what can I help you fight for? All right. We got any questions at all? I know y'all ready to get back to the impeachment trial. Arizona is a wild state. Can I say that? Y'all know Arizona for the longest was considered the Mississippi of the West. Ooh, a lot of history there. A lot of history there. All right.
I have a quick question. I would love to know what's on your reading syllabus, what books you assign to your students in your courses.
Black Power. Let me give you the Black Power class. You ready?
Okay.
Negroes with guns. All right. There's this belief that the Second Amendment doesn't apply to black folk, but we've been owning guns for a long time. Negroes with guns. Be careful with this one now. It's a book by H. Rap Brown called Die Nigger Die. And it's funny when you see white kids walking across campus with that book. All right. It's hilarious. The third book we read Assata Shakur's book. All right. Not Tupac's mom, but Assata Shakur, a Black Panther revolutionary. And the fourth book we read is a book called Do I Dare Disturb the Universe? A true story about a black woman growing up in my hometown of Cleveland during the Black Power era. But she goes to an elite boarding school. And then she goes like to Wellesley or some elite liberal arts college. All right. So I try to sign all autobiographies. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
All right. Mm-hmm. Anything else?
Hi.
Yes.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
How do you help people that instantly, because everyone does, get riled up when they hear white privilege? And how do you help them see what is difficult for them to see?
I don't use the term white privilege at all because I think privilege is relative. And I'll say what I mean. Although I'm a black man, I have a great deal of privilege based upon where I work and my income level. I completely understand that, right? So I think the other way, because, when you tell people you're privileged, what you're basically telling them is that they didn't work hard to get where they are. And I think people are insulted by that. A lot of people did work hard, right? And so what I like to do, I like to tell people, you are in circles where I'm not at, all right? And I know when I talk to my queer students, I am in circles where they aren't at, right? And so what I try to do, I try to use whatever power I have to make things better for them. When I was in my role as vice president, women with children wanted to come work in our division. You know why? Because they understood I valued family. And I would tell them, your family comes first. If you got to come to work late, if you got to take off, because we would have women having panic attacks because they were scared to tell their boss they need to leave early to go pick up their child. Crazy stuff. Women who got pregnant, who were trying to conceal it, from their supervisor, because their supervisor would be like, oh, well, you need to, that maternity leave and all that kind of stuff. So I don't like using the term privilege, and sometimes I tell people, you have an element of power I probably don't have. So I think terminology is very, very important. All right. Hope that helps.
What is your take on the term cancel culture and how it's being used?
Here is what I tell my diehard Republican and Trump supporters. Cancel culture did not originate with the left. It originated in 2003 with the Dixie Chicks when they criticized George Bush and the Iraq War. That's where it started. That is where it started. But we've twisted it around. No, the Dixie Chicks got canceled. All right. And so cancel culture is nothing more than we're going to boycott you. That's it. And I don't think anybody has a problem canceling Harvey Weinstein, Bill Cosby, R. Kelly. Nobody has a problem with that. Right. But I think what it is, people get sensitive around the topic because they feel if I say the wrong thing, if I say something inappropriately, if I like something on my social media account that's inappropriate, there may be some consequences. There should be. Quit posting stuff. Quit retweeting stuff. All right. But understand, if you work for a company, and although this may be on your private social media page, a company is concerned about their brand. And one thing I learned about white folks, I've been living around white people my whole life. You are not about to mess with their money. When I saw some of the demonstrations with Black Lives Matter this summer, I said, there is no way Trump's getting reelected. You know why? And this was confirmed last month. When there's a sense of unrest in a country, it makes foreign investors not want to put money in this country. And what did we see for the first time last month? For a couple weeks ago, China right now gets the majority of foreign investment. It used to be the US. Now the majority of foreign investment is going to China because investors didn't think the United States, they thought it was unstable. They didn't know what was going to go on. So they've kept their money in their pocket. All right.
Hey, Dr. Moore, I got a question.
Yes, sir.
It's more of a hypothetical. let's go back to November 4th. Joe Biden won the election.
Yep.
And he calls you and he says, Dr. Moore, pick a secretary position in my cabinet where you can affect the most change. What position would you take?
I would create a secretary position of strengthening families. I'm just honest. I mean, don't get me wrong. I have voted Democratic my whole life. But some of the nonsense I hear, that dads don't matter, some of this nonsense I hear, to me, it's nonsense. And I think Black people are in a tough situation. All right. Black people at our core are largely more socially conservative than people think, right? Coming out of the Black church, right? But we typically want liberal policies as it relates to race, right? And so, but we're in this stuff where dads don't matter and, the family structure, that stuff has hurt Black people. I'm saying dads do matter. And I even told my friends in same-sex marriages, dads do matter. A mom and dad matters. You know what I mean? It's not indispensable. And so I just think that the family piece is critical, and I even tell some of my friends, who were celebrating the gay marriage amendment, I said, the challenge is not getting married. The challenge is doing what? Staying married. So that's the cabinet position I would create.
Love that. Thank you.
Dr. Moore, I have a quick question.
Please.
I read a book, of course, last summer. It was called Eviction. And I don't know if you're familiar with that book, but it was kind of an expose on Milwaukee, and Milwaukee is a very segregated city. And it talked about how the cycle of eviction and how it affects Black families in the inner city of Milwaukee. And I was left with this, oh my gosh, as a realtor, what could I possibly do about that situation and thinking differently about minorities in that cycle. It's vicious.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I look at that similar to, and I'm making an analogy, the prison rates. In a lot of these major cities, you got a lot of Black and brown people who have been arrested, haven't been convicted, but who've been arrested. They just need $1,000 to get out. They don't have it. So what happens? I get arrested. I'm in jail. I need $1,000 to get out. I can't get out. So now I lose my job. And now I may lose my kid. So it's like this cyclical thing. And I think you're talking about the same thing with evictions, right? As well. I mean, we just have to put more money in people's pockets. But bottom line, that's what we have to do. And we just have to understand that the rules of the game have not been the same for everybody. That does not mean people haven't worked hard. We've all worked hard, right? But the rules of the game have been different. Let me tell you two quick stories. I tell people, when me and my wife sold our house in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, we do what most Black homeowners do. Y'all know what we do, right? We took everything Black off the wall, got rid of the Black magazines because we were, somebody's laughing, because we were told white people will not buy a house from a Black person. So that is what we do. And even now, Black homeowners, if they're getting a second mortgage and they're getting appraised, they will deliberately make sure they are not home when the appraiser comes by because they feel like the house won't appraise as much. So there's a lot there, Carrie, but thank you, for reading. Thank you for that. And I don't know what happened. I don't know why we don't read it. Let me say this about Trump. I think Trump could have been a decent president if he left all the racist rhetoric alone. I think many Americans appreciated him being off the cuff. I think they appreciated this idea of American first. We're going to take care of Americans and not try to police the world, right? But why you got to get into the crazy stuff? All right? And people don't read anymore. Folks, we have got to read. And for those of you who do read, don't argue with folks who don't read. Like, don't argue with anybody who says the election was stolen. You're wasting your time doing that. All right?
Do we have any more questions?
Yeah, I have a question.
Go ahead.
So where do you think the start should be to kind of level a playing field for housing? Is it loan programs? Is it realtor training? Is it financial education? Where would you say we should start?
I think we should make it easier for people to get into homes. Most people are going to pay their mortgage before they do anything else. But it seems like, some of the barriers are making it a little tough now for people to get into homes. We got to also understand that low-income housing is big business. There's a lot of money in low-income housing, and Carrie's saying, people being evicted, going to another apartment complex. So that's what I would say, Leah. Okay. Mm-hmm.
I have a question. Before I had my real estate license, landlording seemed to be like this mysterious field that only certain people who had, like you said, inherited this money from daddy or mommy could get into. And, the white landlords I knew who did not inherit that money, when I would talk to them about my getting into it, they would kind of poo-poo the idea that their whiteness had anything to do with simply being admitted to do something like that, right? So my question is, what do you think we can do about the fact that many landlords and leaseholders don't have a vested interest in creating a respectable or maintaining even a respectable habitat? And oftentimes the legal recourses simply stimulate them to evict. The typical cycle is, you're on a lease for 2 months. I mean, 2 years, right? But after that 2 years, you're on month to month, and they don't, oh, no, you don't have to sign another lease. Right. But we're also not coming over to fix anything either. See? Right.
I mean, my students were often surprised when I told them that up to about 20 years ago, well, man, maybe still be going on, that the majority of property you see in the hood is not owned by Black people. It's not.
Not at all. Not at all.
And then you've always had this unwritten, this quote, gentleman's agreement between housing officials and landlords, that would allow them to rent out properties that are the building code. We're not even talking about building codes. It shouldn't even be inhabitable, let alone building code violations. And those things have gone on for a long time. And typically typically it's the most unsuspecting people you will find who are slumlords. You're like, man, they own all them apartments? Like, yeah, they do, but you would never know. All right. Thank you for the question, Anthony. All right. I don't know if we're over time or not. Are we good or what?
If you have time for one more question.
Yes. Uh-huh. Yeah.
Flashing back to one of your earlier slides, were displaced Black homeowners in Indianapolis relocated or rehomed?
No. They called that urban renewal, and they were forced to go find housing on their own. They weren't given the typical compensation. I think now, if they're building a freeway through your neighborhood, they have to give you an appraisal plus half or something like that. I think that could be negotiated. But no, they weren't really compensated at all. If you go to Pasadena, California, there's a freeway there. I think it may be the 210 or the 710. It just stops. It's the most unique thing in the city you will ever see, but it just stops. You'll see these flashing lights, and it says freeway ends. You got it. Because the homeowners in that wealthy part of Pasadena, they had the political capital. They said, you are not going to build this freeway through our neighborhood and destroy the fabric of our community. So you're talking about the fabric of communities being destroyed. And it's not as simple as tearing people down and moving them somewhere else. I mean, they were forced to scatter and look for housing on their own. Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to jump in at this point in respect for Dr. Moore's time and say thank you to everyone who joined us today. This has been a very enlightening hour. And thank you, Dr. Moore. I think we just barely scratched the surface, and we need to think about doing this again. I'd like to remind you all of the next diversity and inclusion educational program, Testing the Divide, the power reporting behind the Long Island Divided investigation. With investigative reporter Bill Dedman, which will be on Thursday, April 22nd at 10 a.m. You don't want to miss this delve into the housing discrimination on Long Island. Mr. Dedman will review the results of a 3-year investigation that tested 93 agents, 5,763 listings in 250 hours of secretly recorded meetings. Registration is live now on the AAR website under classes and events. And thank you one and all for joining us today. This has been wonderful.